Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic Hypersonic.
I'm Barry P. Cook, and I'm here to talk to you about the latest episode of My Adventures with Superman. It was called Olsen's 11, which of course is a play on Ocean's 11, which of course was a film, twice actually, about a guy whose last name is Ocean, who puts together a group of 11 people to rob a casino, because this episode is about Jimmy Olsen and Lois, I guess, putting together a team to steal a spaceship, which kind of doesn't make sense because it's Lois's idea and they both then work on it. And Jimmy, in fact, resists the idea at first. So why they called it this, other than they could make a funny joke, I don't know. Anyway, it was called Olsen's 11. And as the episode starts, Amanda Waller makes a very dishonest anti-Superman speech announcing the creation of the Human Defense Force and her intention to deal with the so-called threat of Superman and other alien threats. Lois, meanwhile, finds herself regretting breaking up with Clark and needing to find him and make things right. So she schemes with Jimmy to team up with Livewire, of all people, to steal a spaceship, as I was saying, from Star Labs, with which to do so. Jimmy recruits Mala and the Brain from last season to help with the spaceship piloting. Lois tells Jimmy that she's taking the sliver of kryptonite from last season on the mission to use on Kara, and he is not on board with that plan. Speaking of plans, when the security guard the team expected to clock out at a certain time doesn't, because he's unexpectedly pulling a double shift, Jimmy has to confront him directly with an improvised ruse to get him to go away. Waller, at the lab for a surprise inspection, notices right away that security cameras are being looped when our heroes start looping the cameras, surmises that the facility has been breached, and starts the process of finding the invaders, and soon does, leading to a confrontation between our heroes and her soldiers, from which Livewire escapes while leaving Jimmy and Lois behind, while Mala and the Brain are missing in action. After escaping into a ceiling duct, Jimmy and Lois clash over Lois's plan to make Kara wish she'd stayed in space. Upon exiting the duct in a hangar, Lois and Jimmy are reunited with Mala and the Brain, and the four of them launch the ship they plan to steal, only to be temporarily stopped by Waller's robots before Livewire returns with a crew to help Lois, after hearing her express heartbreak over what she thought was the failure of her mission to steal the spaceship and find Clark over comms, because interestingly, Livewire believes in love. This, of course, allows our heroes to escape to space in the ship. Once in space, Lois agrees to not immediately wallop Kara with kryptonite, and to first try talking to her before the ship abruptly arrives at Kara's location and is stopped in its tracks by Kara, and that's where the episode ends. So I enjoyed this episode for a couple of different reasons. One is I really liked seeing Lois immediately regret breaking up with Clark, because it means that as soon as they reconnect, they're going to get back together. And I prefer that to a long, drawn-out thing where Lois is like, oh, I don't know, and I'm afraid to get back together with him, and, you know, he's got this cousin, and I don't want to, you know, I didn't want to see that unfold, because that's what so often happens in these cases where you have a couple that breaks up. Yeah, they might get back together, but it's not before a lot of hemming and hawing and, you know, will they or won't they tension stretched out over a certain period of time. And I hate that. So she immediately regretted it, and she's going to meet up with him and fix things. And I think, or at least that's her intention. And I think that's great. I really like that. And I liked seeing her express self-doubt, because she's always so confident, or at least pretends to be confident. And seeing her regret something she did and feel self-doubt makes her more human and more identifiable. And I thought that was really cool. Seeing Jimmy want to help her was great too, because it shows that he's not only loyal to Clark, but he's also loyal to her, and he cares for her, and he didn't like that she was hurting. So I thought that was great. And I really liked him being the voice of reason, Jimmy, on the subject of Kara, because he met her before anybody knew who she was and got to see that she's kind of a decent person, if a little strange, and wants to give her a chance to be, you know, a good person. And that's really cool, because again, he is loyal to Lois and Clark to a fault. So for him to also be able to say, listen, let's give Kara a chance, knowing that if Lois, for example, does do that, she's risking her own safety because not being on the offensive puts you in the defensive, and that's a less enviable position sometimes, especially in the face of a super being. So it was just interesting to see him express that sort of unmitigated hope that listening to your better angels is the best way to go, even if it's risky, because the dangers of going the other way are guaranteed to end in confrontation that won't go well for the human side versus a Kryptonian, even if Lois does have kryptonite, because then they would be at odds with Clark, right? If something happened to Kara. So I thought it was cool that Jimmy was the voice of reason and let's try peace first. And it was great to see Lois come around to that after first being intent on repelling something that she sees as an impediment to her relationship with Clark. I liked all the scenes with Mala and the Brain because they're very funny. So that was cool. I'm conflicted on the situation with Livewire because up to this point, she's been a villain. And so for them to like go to her and trust her was a little strange. And that it worked was even stranger. But I did then like that she came back to help Lois because she heard Lois over comms talking about how she was brokenhearted and downtrodden because she had failed in her plan and wasn't going to be able to reunite with Clark, and that it, moved her Livewire because she also believes in love. So I thought that was cool because I like my villains, all my characters, but my villains to be three-dimensional versus one-dimensional. So I liked that. There was a little bit of action, not the grandiose action we're used to up to this point, but there was a little bit of action, so that was good. So there was a lot to like in this episode. But what I didn't like is that there was no Superman and really no Kara, except for you see her at the end, just kind of floating there. And it's funny because last week I said, "Oh, this was a really good episode. It featured just Superman and Kara and Brainiac, and no Lois and Jimmy. It gave us a whole half hour of just Superman and Kara, and that was so cool." Which it was. But if I had known that they were then going to balance that out with the following week with a full episode of Lois and Jimmy with no Superman and Kara, I would have said, well, I wish they hadn't done that. I wish they had balanced it so that we'd get Superman and Kara in both episodes. I don't know. I guess it all comes out in the wash, 6 of one, half dozen the other. But to go a whole half hour without Superman and Kara, I think was too high a price to pay for last week getting the entire half hour of just them, if that makes any sense. So anyway, that's really it. Good episode. Lots of cool moments, lots of cool character stuff. And, I'm looking forward to next week as usual. I'm going to get out of here for now. I'll be back to do a breakdown and review of next week's episode once it's released. Until I return, I wish you peace and long life.